One of the things that makes supporting children with autism unique and different is they have what we like to call challenging behaviors. And we like to call them challenging behaviors oftentimes because we think they might be doing things to just give us a challenge. But in reality, in BBA, we like to have you look at that a little bit differently. The challenge is for us to put meaning to the behavior, to understand that the behavior is a way for them to cope with a world that is difficult and stressful for them, and they're doing the best they can. And so what we're going to talk about for the next 10 or 15 minutes is a way to look at behaviors that takes it off of us trying to fix them and puts the challenge back on us to understand them. I'd like to first of all describe what some of the challenging behaviors might look like in children with autism, and these you might have already experienced if you've already worked in some of the programs, or if you're parents, you've certainly experienced it. And you might see children that hit or spit or kick or throw or scream or bite or refuse. No way, no how. You can't make me. And when we're looking at those things, if you're thinking, what would a parent do? Oftentimes you're thinking, I have to make them stop doing this. I have to make them stop. Some say that they're doing these behaviors because they're not motivated to do better. And some say they're doing it because they have bad parents. These parents like that Viv Hazel, she just lets them do anything they want, and so they just keep being bad children. They're spoiled. And what I'd like you to do is avoid those kinds of phrases, and also one of the most damaging phrases for the children we support is the phrase, they have to learn. Because that often means we're going to negate anything that they've said or done and put all of our emphasis on making them listen, making them sit, making them do what it is that we've decided that they should do. We can't let them get away with these behaviors. So here's the shift that I'd like you to take. To go away from these behaviors are there for all of those familiar reasons of spoiled and bad, and try and find other meaning for behaviors. And I'm going to give you a little story of a breakthrough that I had with a father, and we're going to call the child that he was working with, we're going to name him Quinn. The problem with Quinn was he was 7 years old. And one of the things that 7-year-old boys think is the best way to interact with another human being is to be funny. But when you have 7-year-old humor, sometimes adults just don't get the joke. And what happened to Quinn was his dad set some spaghetti in front of him, and we were eating a meal, and I watched Quinn, and I could see we were heading for disaster because he contrived a joke. And the joke was to pick up a handful of spaghetti and toss it on the floor. And Dad's response was so telling. He said, "See, you can't even be nice to this kid. He doesn't even know how to act." And we took that last phrase and made that the definition for the behavior. And I said, brilliant! He doesn't know how to act. So I took him aside and I said, say, Quinn, you know, when your dad said those nice things and you wanted him to keep saying those nice things, here's what dads like to hear when they say nice things. They don't really get spaghetti on the floor is funny. They're odd. But if you just said, thanks, Dad, he would understand that you liked it. Can we try that? And so the dad gave me the grace to try again. And so we went back and we were building some things with a block, and the dad said, wow, Quinn, that's a really great tower. And Quinn said, thanks, Dad. And I watched tears come to this dad's eyes because he had quit blaming Quinn and started to realize that a lot of behavior has different meaning than what we attribute to it. And so in BBA, what we'd like you to do is take this posture with behavior. Observe. Watch what happened just before the behavior. Like with my little friend Quinn, when I watched him be so happy that he was getting something so nice from his daddy, but be so inept on how to deal with it, we had a different plan. And you want to support them. When they're having challenging behaviors, insert the words signs of stress. Because that's what we do for one another as adults. If we're acting kind of wacky, we don't go, oh, I'm just being behavioral today. We say, I'm under a lot of stress lately. And so look what might be causing stress for our kids. So let's say in the old-fashioned way of looking at behavior that you just gave up a few seconds ago, we had decided that the reason they're not doing what we ask of them to do is because they don't wanna. That's the old answer. The new answer would be, what if they're not able to do what we ask them to do because they didn't truly understand what it was we asked of them? One of the familiar behavior approaches that we're used to is called contingent programming, if-then. And so an if-then program would say, hey Viv, would you like to go to the park after school? And Viv would say, sure, yeah, I'd like to do that. And so we would set it up. You can go to the park if you have a good day at school all day long. Well, off Viv goes, thinking by the time I get home tonight, I'm going to go to the park. But what happens when I get to school is the first thing is my teacher, who is usually there, isn't there. And then the new teacher doesn't know the rule that if you want me to go and get my gym shoes, you have to first let me put my backpack away. And so then when I tried to tell her that and she got mad at me, the world of contingent programming would think that I should stop and think, oh, I want to go to the park tonight, so I won't let this behavior stress me. I'll just react calmly so I can go to the park. What Ross Greene says is these children already know they shouldn't hit, they shouldn't kick, they shouldn't spit, they shouldn't swear, they shouldn't do any of those behaviors. They know it in a time of calm. What they don't have is the skill to use that information when they're under stress. One of the things we have are a lot of children seem to ignore us. And when we send our words into their world, our words don't seem to matter. It's like we didn't say a thing. And so, as human beings, we have a funny way of reacting when things don't work. We just do more of the same, but usually louder. And so, if our words don't work, we say, Ryan, did you hear me? And if he still doesn't react, we might go into an if-then kind of behavior. If you don't stop and come here, well, let's step back and look at a different reason why Ryan may not be hearing us. In order for a body and a brain to be able to respond to things that change in the environment, we have to be at a certain level of functioning, of things are okay. We say that kids with autism don't do well with transitions, going from one thing to another. And what I'd like to suggest is they aren't truly transitions in the world of the child. They're interruptions. A transition is when you know what's coming, when you're planning for it, when you're getting ready for it, and when you head towards it. An interruption is when you're doing fine, you're having a good time, you're playing your video game, and some big giant comes in the room and says, stop and do this. I'd like to have you look at how many times a day the children we support are interrupted in their world and demands are put on them for immediate responding. So invite yourself to observe them. If they're left to their own sequence of events, how do they typically stop and start something? How do they evolve from one activity to another? And what we invite you to do when you're working with our kids is join first, join with them where they are, and then lead them where you'd like them to go. Those will help reduce the challenging behaviors. Challenging behaviors are what make it very difficult to support our kids. They're the reasons that often we come into their lives. Because if everything was going well, they wouldn't need us. And so parents look to us. Help us with these challenging behaviors. Help us. Help him quit screaming. And we want to do a good job. We want to make that occur. What we invite you to do is let the parents know, you know, we're going to help you. But it may not look direct. It may not look like I've come in and I'm working on the screaming, because what I've really started with is a tickle game. Or what I've really started with is things that he likes, like jumping on a ball. But all of that is part of forming a relationship, observing the child, supporting the child, and being ready to teach. One of the tips I'd like to talk about for you working with our children is the tip of the self-talk that you'll be using to help you get through stressful situations. One of the first things that you might worry about is if a child's having a meltdown and the parents invited me into their world to stop the child having a meltdown, as a professional, haven't I failed? And what I'd like you to be aware of is the stresses that were there before you came in are going to take a long time to understand and mediate. How you respond to stressed behavior is going to be a process. And so at first you may not be able to prevent behaviors from happening, but you certainly might be able to shorten the duration or change the outcome at the end. So one of the first things for you as a professional is realizing that you're on a journey, that you're starting where the child is, and just because you walked in the door with the title of line staff or senior therapist, or because you're a parent who want desperately for the behaviors to change, it doesn't happen immediately. And asking you to understand the behaviors is a process. Another issue that comes up when we're looking at dealing with challenging behaviors is a belief that I can't let him get away with this. If I let him do this, aren't I telling him that this is okay? And what we ask you to do is ignore behaviors, but never ignore the child. It's part of the process. And so if a child that you're asking to do something, let's say you're working on some blocks and he throws the blocks, if you stop interacting with him to make him go pick up the blocks, you've lost the energy that you brought into that moment. So ignoring that behavior in that respect might look something like, oh my gosh, look where that went. Here's another one. Let's put it here. To see if you can help maintain the relationship and not get deflected into the stress behavior. So you're going to be able to tell yourself, oh, you know, I'd really rather he not throw that block, but that's not where we're at right now. I need to help him maintain some interaction here. Another, and probably one of the most powerful issues that comes up when we have challenging behaviors is fear. Fear that somebody's going to get hurt, either the child or someone in the area or property. And so what we need to know is the escalation of behavior of that child. What are they typically doing when they have acting out or challenging behaviors, and plan ahead for that. So if a child is really dangerous to self, you're going to want to have some strategies of how to intervene prior to it getting to that stage. And you might be able to use some sensory support, like bouncing on a ball or using some starburst or internal sensory support. But ultimately, and this is really important with behavior, we know we aren't going to stop the child's expression of stress or difficulty through challenging behaviors overnight. So have a plan. If the child has a history of actively hurting others, you'll need more than one person there when you're working with them. Remember that you're an employee of a program that's governed by rules and regulations. One of the rules and regulations for anyone working with children is that we cannot restrain them. Restraining is dangerous. When individuals are restrained, whether it's in police interaction or with juveniles, that's the highest likelihood that somebody will get hurt, either the child or the people trying to help them. And so if we know our children and we know that that issue of supporting them when they're really having a difficult time is going to be frequent, we need to have a plan in place, and that has to include the parents. So the self-talk that we'd like you to cultivate is, I understand that my job here is to find out what's getting in the way of success for him, to observe him, to come up with strategies to help proactively understand what he needs, or reactively give him the support when he's under stress. I've asked you and invited you to understand the child and observe the child and have a relationship, but none of that guarantees that immediately stress behaviors will go away. So you need to have some strategies and understanding of how to help the child manage stress while you're developing the other strategies. There are 3 important places where you can put changes so that the child's stress may be reduced. And one is in the environment. Let's say one of the issues for a child is every time I hear the phone ring, I have an explosive behavior. We can do things that might change how that phone rings. We can put a situation in where it has a light response rather than a tone response. We can change the environment as we help figure out what's stressing the child about that. Is it the sound? Is it that they had no way to predict that that was going to happen? Can we have a variety of ways to change the environment? If you have a child that has a sibling and whenever they're together they're hitting each other and wrestling or out of control, you can create opportunities for them to have a different interaction. You could create opportunities for them to do something that is a shared activity. You can change how they have developed that relationship. And so you can work on the environment to modulate or change how stress occurs. A second is that you can work on how you react to stress or how you cause a stress response in the child. Some of our parents tell us that the children just can't take the word no for an answer. And remember, you're the adult here. You know language in a variety of subtle and sophisticated ways, and there are many ways to soften no and still have the same impact. And so, excuse me, validating a child and saying, oh, I know that you want to go outside and so you'd really rather not finish this. Let's just do one more and then we'll get outside. And that's, no, you can't go outside right now until we finish this. But it changes to a supportive response rather than a reactive response. So changing how you interact with the child is another way. And the third way, and the most important way, is giving the child strategies to manage their own stress, to be able to identify things that are bothering them and give them right to their own voice. Oftentimes, behaviors are a way to say no. No, thank you. I'd rather not. And we often believe, or in the old way you might have believed, then I must make the child do it because they've told me no. We have to respect that no is an appropriate interaction for human beings and give the child voice and a right to say those things and give guidance to that. So the 3 ways that you might look at ways of managing stress or preventing it are, what can we do in the environment? What can I do to help reduce the likelihood? And what can I help the child learn to help reduce the likelihood of an escalation of behaviors? As I said before, reality is also what we deal with, and my belief is that you are going to be dealing with issues of challenging behaviors that escalate. and you need to know what to do after an episode is over with. There are needs that you have, and needs that the child have, and needs that other people in the environment have after an event occurs. The child just wants things to be okay. And this isn't an intentional thought. This is truly how they manage their life. Because imagine the numbers of stresses and difficulties they have in their day. If they dwelled on every one, they would never be able to navigate the world. So at the end of a stressful situation, what the child needs is to know that you're okay, and you still like them, and you're not mad at them. But they don't ask for it in that way. They often behave in a way that makes you believe, sometimes, they don't care. Look at that, they're acting like it never happened. So in order to meet their needs, you're going to need to understand at the end of an episode, they need to be done. They are done with it. But you have some needs. You want to make sure it doesn't happen again. You want to teach them ways so that it won't happen again. What you need to understand is the time to teach is not during or just after a stressful episode. And you know this about yourself. If you're really upset, you aren't processing helpful information. You just need to get through it. So your need to teach and the energy that you have for that really will need to go into planning strategies that you can use at a different time, not at that time. And other people in the environment, if there are other children, they've just watched something frightening. They need to know that you're okay, you're in charge, you're not mad, and that you're there to help their sibling or their classmate or their friend. And so in order to take care of what you need to do after an event, you need to understand the needs you have. You're also a human being. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to feel like I failed. Darn it, I thought I had him figured out and he went and did that again. All that reminds you is human beings are complicated. And observing and understanding takes time. So at the end of a challenging behavior, you're back in the process of observing, supporting, and creating ways to teach.